At 4:47 a.m., mechanic Naomi Brooks heard a sharp sound beyond Bay 7. An elderly woman stood by the fence, clutching her cheek, while a consultant claimed she had attacked him. A brown envelope lay between them.
Those are my papers.
Evelyn said its papers falsely declared her nearby workshop abandoned, even though Naomi spotted fresh signs of use.
Step away from her.
They're demolishing it in 72 hours, Evelyn warned. Then 2 black vehicles entered the yard. A tall man stepped out, saw Evelyn's cheek, and froze. Mom!
This building was used recently.
What began as a pre-dawn intervention became a battle over truth, family, and the meaning of protection.
Mom.
Naomi Brooks heard the slap over the hiss of a bus compressor. It was 4:47 in the morning. Bay 7 smelled of diesel and cold steel. Naomi stepped from beneath an open engine panel and looked toward the service lane. Beyond the half-raised shutter, an elderly woman stood beside the fence separating the depot from an old brick workshop. Her silver locks had come loose near one ear. A man in a tan overcoat faced her, a leather folder beneath his arm. The woman touched her cheek once. "Mrs. Carter," the man said, "you pushed me. I reached for my papers. Those are for different things." He bent for a brown envelope near her shoes. Naomi crossed the lane and set one steel-toe boot beside it. "Leave it there." The man straightened. His eyes moved from her powerful shoulders to the city depot patch on her coveralls. "This is a private property matter. You struck her on city property. I lost my balance when she grabbed me." Naomi looked at the space between them. "No, you didn't." The man glanced toward the dark depot office, then at the camera aimed away from the lane. Naomi understood. There was no useful witness except a mechanic he expected to intimidate. She had once seen a supervisor dismiss a warning until a coworker left in an ambulance. Since then, noticing had meant responsibility. "Call security," the man said. "Mrs. Carter is trespassing. I'm authorized to recover my client's documents." The older woman gave a dry laugh. "He has been authorized to say authorized as often as necessary." "What's your name?" Naomi asked. "Victor Hales." "Hales Property Transition. Step away from her, Mr. Hales." His jaw tightened. "You have no idea what you're interfering with. Then explain it while we wait for security." Victor moved toward the envelope. Naomi bent first and picked it up. He reached for her wrist, then stopped. Naomi did not raise her fists. Years of powerlifting had taught her how much strength could remain still. She met his eyes until his hand dropped. "Give that to me." It fell at her feet. "It contains confidential acquisition papers." The older woman held out her hand. "With my name on every page." Naomi passed it to her. Victor's collar was damp despite the cold. "Mrs. Carter, this is your final chance to sign voluntarily. If you force the next phase, I cannot protect you from the consequences." "Protect me?" she said. "Is that what you call this?" What was she supposed to sign? Naomi asked. Confirmation that she vacated the premises. The woman opened the envelope. A yellow tab marked an empty signature line. "I have not vacated anything," she said. "I was teaching there last Thursday. The building is condemned. Then why did your people service the furnace on Monday?" Victor had no answer. Naomi looked through the fence. Most workshop windows were dusty, but one had been wiped clear from inside. Fresh blue grease pencil marks crossed the electrical panel, the kind Naomi used after a completed repair. The building did not look abandoned. It looked interrupted. A radio crackled inside Victor's coat. He silenced it. "Go," Naomi said. "Security can find you through your company." Victor adjusted his overcoat, rebuilding his polished posture. "You think you helped her? You may have made this much worse." He walked through the service gate and disappeared between two utility trucks. Naomi waited until his footsteps faded. "Are you hurt?" "My pride is furious," the woman said. "The rest of me will manage. My name is Naomi Brooks. Evelyn Carter." She returned the papers to the envelope, though her fingers trembled once. "And I owe you an explanation." She pointed toward the workshop. A demolition notice had been fixed to the door. Naomi could not read the small print, but the date was large enough to see. 3 days from now. "They're tearing it down in 72 hours, Evelyn said. "And if Victor gets my signature, everyone will believe I left willingly." Depot security arrived 9 minutes after Victor left. The guard photographed Evelyn's cheek, took Naomi's statement, and recorded the time. He asked whether Naomi had seen a closed fist. "Open hand," she said. "One strike." Then he tried to take her envelope. Evelyn refused an ambulance but accepted an ice pack from the break room. She held it to her face while Naomi's supervisor studied the demolition notice through the fence. "That property isn't ours," he said. "File your report, Brooks, then get back to Bay 7's. It was not cruelty. It was the narrow language institutions used when a problem stood 6 feet beyond their responsibility." Naomi finished the report. She repaired a coolant line, checked 2 pressure gauges, and signed a bus back into service. But every time she reached for her grease pencil, she remembered the fresh blue mark on the workshop's electrical panel. At 6:15, her shift ended. Evelyn was still outside. "You waited here for 90 minutes? I was deciding whether you looked like someone who could keep a confidence. And you look tired enough to be honest." Naomi almost smiled. "Show me the building." Evelyn unlocked the pedestrian gate and led her across a weed split yard. The workshop's brick walls were stained with age, but the gutters had been cleared recently. A new steel plate covered one damaged section of the loading door. Victor had called the property abandoned. Abandoned places did not repair themselves. Inside, the air smelled of machine oil, sawdust, and old radiator heat. Long workbenches ran beneath hanging lamps. Some equipment had been covered with canvas, but not all of it. A vise held a narrow strip of aluminum. Fresh filings glittered beneath it. 6 coffee mugs stood beside a clean sink. Naomi touched the side of one, still dry but recently washed. On a chalkboard, someone had written a list of practical exercises. Replace a plug, test a fuse, identify a worn bearing. Beneath it were 8 first names and check marks, dated the previous Thursday. "You teach electrical repair?" "Electrical basics, small engines, plumbing, whatever keeps someone from paying $200 for a $10 problem." Evelyn placed the ice pack on a table. Mostly adults. People changing careers. People who were told they were too old to learn or too unreliable to hire. "How long has this been here?" 41 years. "My husband and I opened it with 3 donated toolboxes and a furnace that only worked when kicked." Naomi looked toward the furnace alcove. "Does it still require persuasion?" "Not since Monday." A white service sticker had been fixed to the metal casing. The ink was new. Beside it, the blue grease pencil line crossed the access panel. Naomi crouched. "This is a completion mark. The technician used it after restoring power." "That is what I told Victor." Naomi followed the conduit to the main panel. One corner of the inspection tag had been torn away, but the remaining section showed a recent month and a technician number. Who ordered the service? Victor's office. He said the building needed to be stabilized before transfer. And when did they declare it empty? Evelyn removed the papers from her envelope. The first page described the property as unoccupied and cleared of personal possessions. According to the declaration, no classes, commercial activity, or community services had taken place there for more than 4 months. Naomi looked around at the labeled storage bins, cleaned tools, lesson board, and chairs arranged in a half circle. Who wrote this? A consultant hired to prepare the site for redevelopment. You mean Victor? He delivered it. He would not say who prepared the occupancy report. Naomi turned to the yellow signature tab. The paragraph above it was denser than the rest. By signing, Evelyn would confirm that she had voluntarily surrendered access before the acquisition date. She would also waive any claim based on continued use, relocation costs, stored property, or disruption of community programs. "This isn't confirmation that you're leaving," Naomi said. "It says you already left." "Exactly." "Then why do they still need your signature?" "Because someone discovered that a locked door and an empty building are not the same thing." Opened a metal cabinet. Inside were safety glasses in individual cloth bags, attendance sheets, and project boxes labeled with students' names. A bus transfer receipt from 3 days earlier lay on top. "Victor changed the locks 2 weeks ago," she said. "I had a spare side door key. When he found out I was still coming in, he offered me a settlement." "How much?" "Enough to make him believe I would stop asking questions." Naomi examined the attendance sheets. Different handwriting, emergency contacts, tools assignments. One student had written a note thanking Evelyn for helping him prepare for an apprenticeship test. This was not an elderly woman clinging to a room full of memories. People were still using this place to build futures. "Why hasn't anyone challenged the demolition?" Naomi asked. The notice was filed under a vacant property procedure. No active tenant means no relocation hearing. No community program means no interruption to review. And your signature makes that version official. It makes it convenient. A truck passed outside, shaking dust from the window frame. Naomi noticed that Evelyn had braced one hand against the bench. "You shouldn't be handling this alone." "I am not alone." "Who else knows?" For the first time, Evelyn hesitated. "Someone who believes the workshop closed months ago." Why would they believe that? Because people with large responsibilities often accept small lies when those lies are of unorganized folders. Naomi returned to the acquisition papers. The upper pages carried Victor's company name, but the final sheet identified the buyer. A silver emblem appeared above 3 words. Naomi had seen that emblem on freight containers, airport billboards, and business reports playing above the depot's vending machines. The company was developing a distribution campus across the industrial district. She read the name aloud. Meridian Arc Logistics. Evelyn slowly folded the ice pack. "Yes," she said, "and once you learn who authorized this purchase, you may wish you had gone home." Headlights swept across the workshop windows. 2 black vehicles stopped at the gate. Security officers entered first, checking the yard and depot fence. A tall man in a charcoal overcoat followed them. Evelyn closed her eyes. That was faster than I expected. The man saw the mark on her cheeks and stopped. "Mom." The word changed the room. Naomi recognized Marcus Carter from business programs. He was the founder of Meridian Arc Logistics. He was also Evelyn's son. "Who did this?" Marcus asked. "Victor Calls." Marcus turned to security. "Find him. Keep him off Meridian property until legal reviews this." "We'll deal with him," he told Evelyn. "You're leaving now." "No, it isn't safe. It was safe until your consultants arrived." Marca looked at the wiring and patched loading door. "This entire structure is unsafe." "The furnace was serviced Monday," Naomi said. "Someone considered it safe enough to send a technician inside." Marcus noticed her depot coveralls. "And you are?" "Naomi Brooks. I work next door. I saw Victor strike her. She also kept him from taking my papers," Evelyn said. "Speak to her as if she belongs in the room." Marcus's expression tightened. "Thank you for helping my mother. My team can handle this now." Naomi lifted the torn inspection tag. "Can they explain why this building was reported vacant before its final maintenance service?" Marcus looked from the tag to the chair's lesson board. His eyes stopped on Thursday's attendance marks. "What is all this?" "My class," Evelyn said. "You told me you had stopped teaching." "I said I stopped running full programs after your father died. I did not say I abandoned the workshop." "The reports say it has been empty since winter." "The reports are false." Marcus studied the names on the board. "How many people come here?" 8 in this group. 23 this year. You brought them into a condemned building? It was condemned 6 days ago. Your company repaired the furnace 3 days ago. Even your mistakes cannot agree with each other. Marcus removed his gloves. The controlled expression Naomi knew from television disappeared. In its place was a son calculating how much danger he had failed to notice. I approve the industrial campus acquisition, he said. 34 parcels. This address was listed as vacant storage with no active tenant. You signed it? Evelyn asked. I signed the acquisition authorization. Not your removal papers. You authorized the machine. Victor is one of its moving parts. I did not know you were still here. You did not ask. Marcus turned toward the workbenches. Height marks had been cut into a wooden post years ago. Faded initials climbed from a child's reach to an adult's shoulder. His initials were among them. For several seconds, he said nothing. Then fear returned, and with it the need to take command. Pack what is essential, he said. My team will inventory the rest. No one inventories my tools. Mom, you were assaulted before sunrise beside a demolition site by a man working under your authority, and that is why I'm getting you out. Evelyn folded the acquisition papers and placed them in Naomi's hands. Marcus stared at the transfer. Those are company documents. They have my name on every page, Evelyn said. Naomi keeps them. She is not your attorney. No, she is my witness. Marcus looked from his mother to Naomi, then to the furnace tag contradicting his company's records. I can stop the demolition, he said. I can buy another building, move every tool, and fund these classes properly. You never have to come back here. Evelyn's expression softened, but only briefly. You always offer the largest answer because it saves you from hearing the smaller one. I'm trying to protect you. No, Marcus. You are trying to remove the thing that frightens you. He drew a breath but did not interrupt. I am not one of your delayed shipments, she said. I am not a damaged parcel, and I will not be transferred because managing me is easier than listening to me. Marcus stood beneath the height marks bearing his initials, surrounded by the place that had taught him how to build things. Evelyn faced him without raising her voice. You treat me like another problem your company can relocate. Marcus did not answer his mother. One of his security officers entered from the yard and reported that Victor's vehicle was gone. Marcus instructed him to preserve the gate footage and contact the company's legal department. Naomi shook her head. Before your lawyers start making calls, photograph everything exactly as it is. Marcus looked at her. My legal team knows how to preserve evidence. They know documents. I know maintenance work. If someone moves a tag, wipes a panel, or replaces a service sticker, the useful part may disappear. He glanced at Evelyn, then lowered his phone. What do you need? It was the first time he had asked instead of instructed. Naomi began with the furnace. The white service sticker listed a technician number, completion date, and abbreviated work order code. She photographed it beside that morning's newspaper, so the date could not later be disputed. Then she documented the blue grease pencil line, the replaced screws on the access panel, and the clean metal surrounding them. Those screws were removed recently, she said. Older metal is dull. The tool marks are bright. Marcus crouched beside her. What does that prove? Someone opened this furnace after the property was supposedly empty. She moved to the electrical panel. The torn inspection tag still showed part of a date and the final digits of an authorization number. Victor may say the technician entered without his knowledge, Marcus said. Then we find out who requested the work. Evelyn brought them a gray binder from beneath the front desk. It contained utility bills, student attendance sheets, repair receipts, and 40 years of handwritten notes. Marcus opened it and recognized his father's block printing on the oldest pages. Naomi noticed his hand pause over the writing, but she kept them focused. Separate memory from evidence, she said. Both matter, but only one stops a demolition crew. By 8:30, Meridian's legal director had sent the acquisition file to Marcus's secure tablet. Occupancy declaration appeared on page 46. The building was described as vacant, disconnected from essential utilities, and inaccessible because of structural risk. Victor had signed the declaration 11 days earlier. Naomi placed the tablet beside the furnace. An empty building with disconnected utilities cannot receive a powered test 8 days later. Marcus enlarged the signature. Victor certified the property before the final inspection. He did more than that, Naomi said. He ordered work on a building he had already declared unsafe to enter. The service company initially refused to release its records. Naomi did not argue. She read the code from the sticker and asked one question instead. Was this emergency stabilization or an occupancy service? After a long pause, the dispatcher answered that the code began with an O, occupancy service. That classification required active power, an accessible interior, and an authorized person on site to confirm that the system operated correctly. The work order arrived 20 minutes later. Victor Hales had requested it himself. His instructions were brief: restore reliable heat, verify the electrical draw, and leave no interruption to scheduled use. Evelyn read the final phrase twice. Scheduled use, she said. He knew about my classes. Marcus stood at the workbench, staring at Victor's name. Naomi expected anger. Instead, he looked embarrassed. I approved this purchase after 3 department reviews, he said. Every summary calls the site vacant. Summaries move the parts. Someone does not want you to question, Evelyn replied. Marcus did not defend himself. They built a timeline across the workbench. Attendance records proved that classes had continued. Utility bills showed uninterrupted electricity. The service order established authorized entry. The demolition declaration claimed the opposite. But Naomi was bothered by something smaller. The furnace technician had written the authorization number by hand. The digits did not match the electronic copy Meridians had received that morning. Marcus called the service company again. This time, Naomi asked for the technician's field record rather than the office invoice. The field record had been completed on a carbon copy pad. The technician kept the yellow sheet. The customer received the white original. The service company sent a photograph of its copy. At the bottom, beneath Victor's signature, was another line absent from Meridian's electronic file. Site remains occupied. Instructor requests heat maintained for evening training sessions. Marcus compared the 2 versions. Someone removed this before the record entered our system. Naomi examined the photographed page. Along its left edge were faint impressions from the sheet written immediately afterward, a date, a parcel code, and 3 incomplete letters. She recognized the code from the acquisition file. Carbon paper leaves pressure marks, she said. If we find the next sheet, we may learn who received the original. Marcus searched the digital archive. There was no record of it. Evelyn checked the binder. Nothing. Naomi then noticed that the workshop's old receipt book was missing 1 white page between 2 numbered carbon copies. The remaining stub carried the same parcel code. Someone had stood side this bondage, accepted the technician's warning, and removed the only copy meant for the property owner. Victor had signed the service request, but someone inside Meridian had helped the contradiction disappear. Marcus called Meridian's legal director and ordered an immediate hold on the demolition. Do not destroy anything, he said. No files, no emails, no handwritten notes. Suspend Victor's access and preserve every version of the occupancy report. Evelyn listened from across the workbench. And who will conduct the investigation? She asked when he ended the call. Our compliance department. The same department that approved the acquisition. They approved what they were shown. So did you? Marcus placed his phone beside the conflicting service records. I can appoint an outside attorney. Paid by Meridian. Someone has to pay them. That does not mean Meridian should choose the questions. Naomi watched Marcus's patience tighten. He was accustomed to problems measured in contracts, deadlines, and losses. Every answer he offered had a budget and a person assigned to execute it. His mother kept asking who would remain in control. Marcus opened a property map on his tablet. There is a vacant training center 6 miles north. It has new wiring, accessible entrances, secured parking, and twice this floor space. I can transfer the equipment before the demolition deadline. Evelyn looked toward the workbench, scarred by decades of tools. You still think the building is the problem. I think a building with structural warnings, as a consultant willing to strike you, is not worth risking your safety. The consultant can be removed. So can you? The words landed harder than Marcus intended. Evelyn's face changed, not with anger but recognition. That is what Victor wanted, she said. He simply used a cheaper sentence. Marcus looked away. Naomi walked to the chalkboard and studied the student list. Beside one name, Evelyn had written bus route 18. Another had a note about a night shift ending at 10. The workshop stood between 2 transit lines and within walking distance of a public housing complex. 6 miles is not 6 miles to everyone, Naomi said. Marcus examined the notes. This place works because people can reach it, Evelyn added. They come after shifts. Some share cars. Some do not have cars. A larger building in the wrong place is smaller than this one. I could provide transportation. For how long? As long as necessary. Until a quarterly review calls it inefficient. Marcus did not answer. Evelyn opened the gray binder and removed a photograph of the workshop before the brick had darkened with age. Her late husband stood beside a row of mismatched toolboxes. Around him were adults in work clothes, each holding a certificate. Your father and I made one promise when we opened this place, she said. No decision about the workshop would be made without the people who used it. Marcus studied the photograph. I remember that day. You were 9. You complained because we made you sweep before the celebration. I swept half the floor. You moved the dirt behind the compressor. A brief smile crossed his face and disappeared. Evelyn placed the photograph on the workbench. After your father died, you offered to create a foundation. I refused because you had already selected the board, the building, and the programs before asking what I wanted. I was trying to keep this alive. You were trying to keep me from carrying something painful, because it was destroying you. No, it was exhausting me. Those are not the same thing. Marcus lowered his eyes to his father's handwriting, in the binder. Naomi could see that he wanted to defend every call he had made, every assistant he had sent, every generous offer his mother had declined. Instead, he pulled out a chair. What would an independent review look like? He asked. Evelyn remained standing, one reviewer chosen by the students and instructors, one chosen by Meridian, a third agreed upon by both. Full access to every acquisition record, including revisions and deleted drafts. And demolition remains suspended until they report. Not suspended at your discretion. Suspended in writing. Marcus nodded slowly. Agreed. Naomi noticed Evelyn's shoulders loosen. It was not forgiveness. It was the first decision in the room that had not been made for her. Marcus called legal again. This time, he did not issue instructions until Evelyn had approved the wording. He required Meridian to fund the review without controlling its findings, and ordered all property action halted pending a signed report. Halfway through the call, the legal director interrupted him. Marcus listened, then switched the phone to speaker. We received a response from Victor Hales, the director said. He denies High's using force and claims Mrs. Carter had already consented to vacate. She did not, Naomi said. He submitted a prior acknowledgement from the acquisition file. It appears to carry her signature. A document arrived on Marcus's tablet. The form was dated 7 weeks earlier. It stated that Evelyn had permanently ended all instruction at the workshop and surrendered possession voluntarily. At the bottom was a careful signature. Evelyn Carter. Marcus turned the screen toward his mother. She did not touch it. "That resembles my name," she said. "But I never signed that paper." The independent review began the next afternoon in a municipal property office. Beyond the window, Evelyn could see the workshop roof. A demolition excavator waited 2 blocks away, its steel arm folded against the sky. 3 reviewers sat at the table, one chosen by Evelyn, one by Meridian, and a city engineer accepted by both sides. Victor arrived with a lawyer and did not look at her. Naomi set down the torn inspection tag, the furnace records, and both versions of the service report. She wore clean mechanic coveralls instead of a suit. Victor called the depot Confrontation a misunderstanding. He described Evelyn as a trespasser and Naomi as an unidentified employee who had used her size to obstruct him. A reviewer looked at Naomi's identification card. "Did you threaten Mr. Hales?" "I told him to step away and wait for security." "Did you touch him?" "No." Her strength had nothing to do with whether his records were true. The review turned to the form carrying Evelyn's signature. Victor said she had signed it 7 weeks earlier, then regretted surrendering the property. Evelyn's calendar showed that she had attended a skills conference 90 miles away that day. Registration records confirmed it. Victor said the date must be wrong. Then Meridian's records specialist displayed the file history. The form had been created only 12 days earlier from a template that did not exist 7 weeks ago. Evelyn's signature had been lifted from an old safety waiver. A faint gray line beneath her name matched the edge of the original scan. The question was no longer whether Evelyn had forgotten signing. It was who had assembled the lie. A Meridian acquisitions coordinator admitted removing the technician's occupancy note after Victor called it an error. She had not created the false form, but she had replaced the field record with the cleaner copy that entered Meridian's system. Marcus sat behind company counsel and did not interrupt. When Naomi was called, she arranged the records by time: Victor's vacancy declaration, the furnace request, the technician's carbon copy, the demolition filing, and the false surrender form. "A furnace repair does not prove anyone used the building," Victor's lawyer said. "No," Naomi replied. "That is why I checked the depot logs. Every pre-dawn shift began with an electrical load test at Bay 7. The team recorded fluctuations from the utility feeder shared with the workshop. 2 weeks earlier, the logs showed repeated evening power draws from the neighboring building. Beside the readings, another mechanic had written, "Evening class next door. Furnace cycling normally." The entry carried a city timestamp and 3 employee signatures. It existed before anyone knew the workshop would become disputed evidence. Naomi placed it beside the file history. "The false surrender form was created 4 days after our team recorded active heat and evening use," she said. "The building did not become vacant. The paperwork changed after its use became inconvenient." Victor's lawyer asked if she was qualified to determine fraud. "No, I am qualified to read maintenance records. The reviewers can decide what they mean." The engineer matched the power cycles to Evelyn's class hours. The torn tag matched the technician number. Pressure marks on the missing carbon stub carried Victor's parcel code. Victor requested a recess. When he returned, his polished manner was gone. He admitted copying Evelyn's signature and backdating the form. His consultancy was close to collapse. The acquisition was behind schedule, and an active community program would have triggered a costly relocation review. "I thought the workshop would close either way," he said. "I was speeding up the inevitable." Evelyn met his eyes. "Then why did you need my consent?" Victor had no answer. Before sunset, the panel suspended demolition pending a full structural and occupancy review. Evelyn's surrender form was voided. Victor's conduct was referred to the city attorney and independent investigators. Every parcel in Meridian's project would be checked for the same pattern. Marcus stood, but he announced no donation and promised no rescue. "My company gave Mr. Hales the authority he misused," he said. "I accepted convenient summaries as truth. I did not know what was done here. I was responsible for knowing." He sat without asking for forgiveness. Outside, the excavator was loaded onto a transport truck. Before the 72-hour deadline, its arm moved away from the workshop. Winning the review did not reopen the workshop. The structural assessment found 2 loose wall anchors, a blocked roof drain, and an exit light that needed replacement. None justified immediate demolition, but Evelyn could not resume classes until the repairs were complete. When the engineer explained this, she argued for 11 minutes. Then Naomi placed the report beside her coffee. "You fought for a fair inspection," she said. "You cannot reject it because it found something inconvenient." Evelyn looked offended. Marcus concealed a smile. "Do not enjoy this," she told him. "I didn't say anything. You are enjoying it silently." The repairs took 6 weeks. Meridian paid for them as part of its responsibility for the failed acquisition process, but Evelyn refused to let the company own the building afterward. Marcus proposed a foundation. She rejected it. He suggested transferring the workshop into her name. She rejected that too. "I am 74, she said. "Saving this place should not mean chaining it to me." The final agreement created an independent community trust. Its board included former students, local tradespeople, an adult education representative, and 1 member selected by Evelyn. Meridian received no ownership interest and no control over the curriculum. Marcus read every page before signing. For once, he suggested no revisions. His company also changed its acquisition rules. No property could be classified as vacant, based only on a consultant's summary. Original service records had to be preserved, and someone independent of the purchase team had to verify occupancy in person. Victor's investigation continued elsewhere. Evelyn did not follow it closely. "I wanted him stopped," she told Naomi. "I do not intend to let him occupy the rest of my life." Naomi returned to the depot, but she was no longer as willing to disappear beneath an engine whenever a room became difficult. When a supervisor missed Mr. Mechanic's warning about uneven brake pressure, Naomi placed the readings on his desk and stayed until he reviewed them. The bus was held back. A damaged valve was found before it returned to service. No one applauded. No one needed to. Evelyn later asked Naomi to direct the workshop's mechanical program. "I already have a job," Naomi said. "I know. That is why I said direct. Not abandon your health insurance." Naomi agreed to teach 2 evenings a week. She designed the first course around practical diagnostics, the quiet signs that appeared before a machine failed, and the importance of recording what others might overlook. On reopening morning, Marcus arrived without photographers, company banners, or a speech. A new sign hung above the entrance, "East What Siskills. Workshop Munity since 1985. The Meridian name appeared nowhere. Marcus stood beneath the sign and nodded. "It looks right," he said. Evelyn carried a box of safety glasses toward the door. Marcus reached for it, then stopped. "Would you like help?" She considered him. "You may carry the second box." It was a small exchange, but Naomi noticed Marcus wait for the answer. Former students filled the yard. Some brought repaired tools they had kept for decades. Others arrived with children, work uniforms, or certificates earned after Evelyn's classes gave them enough confidence to apply. Inside, the old benches had been cleaned but not replaced. Marcus found his childhood initials on the wooden post. He touched them once, then took a seat in the last row. Evelyn stood before the locked workshop door. Marcus did not reach for the key. She unlocked it herself. That evening, Naomi taught 8 new apprentices how to identify a worn bearing. One student struggled to align the housing and apologized for taking too long. "Slow is fine," Naomi said. "Unobservant is expensive." The student tried again. This time, the bearing seated correctly. Naomi handed her the blue greased pencil. Mark the panel. A finished repair should leave a record. The apprentice drew one clean blue line across the metal. Months earlier, a mark like that had proved the workshop was not empty. Now it meant something more. Someone had learned the work. Someone would remember who completed it. The building was no longer surviving, only because Evelyn refused to leave. It had a future because others had finally learned how to help without taking it away from her. So what does protection mean when the person you love is asking to be heard?